Last night I went to see Wonder Woman, and it was pretty good. I wouldn't say it's my favorite movie, but it was entertaining. The previews weren't entertaining, and the commercials beforehand weren't entertaining, but the movie was entertaining enough. And after the movie, I was walking through the parking lot, and two men were playing and singing the song Fast Car by Tracy Chapman. And that's interesting because one of the only songs I've been listening to on YouTube lately is a remix of that song by Jonas Blue. And the YouTube video actually has two women dancing together in just this nice and happy way. So it makes me happy to watch that video and see different kinds of love expressed in different ways without just making them overtly sexual, but just kind of happy and fun. And I like that video. It's awesome. So it was sort of magical for the first song I really hear people playing out in the open public space to be that song. And if I was smart, I would have taken a video for at least a few seconds, but I don't like to put other people in my videos without permission, so I just don't do that. But they were quite talented. It was a guitarist and a violinist playing. So that was kind of magical. And I did want to see the movie just because of how it's sort of a superhuman, superhumanity, superhero type movie. And today I booked my train ticket home. Yes, a train ticket, it cost me $158 instead of maybe $100 to fly, but I don't really like flying, but I might choose to fly anyway. But I just booked the ticket, so I have it. And so when I booked the ticket, I grabbed my passport, and in my passport I found this that I probably wrote like 2 months ago, and I was trying to just have this overt reminder. And it says, superhuman embodied, help with magic. We help with magic, not mental illness. And I guess I'm writing a note here to myself about having some sort of waiver that we help with magic, not mental illness. So there's no assumption of illness, so there's no actual liability of any kind to do with mental illness, because this isn't dealing with that at all. And I also wrote the Krishnamurti quote, is it possible for human beings to bring about a totally different category or dimension of the mind? And it's interesting that he says human beings to bring it about, not to just to magically happen or just some act of grace, but human beings have to bring this about. We have to invite it, we have to wonder, we have to question, we have to look, we have to see, we have to inquire. And can we learn together and build a bridge to magic? So I know in the United States they have some recovery learning communities, and that still has an implication that something was wrong. Maybe something was really right, and it appears like something's really wrong. Maybe something was wrong, and it's trying to be made right. And that's kind of the magic of all of it. So whatever it is that I do move into creating, it might have manifested by this journey through mental illness, but I never thought it was that in the first place. And if there was something like what it is I want to create, maybe I would have never had to go through that at all. But in going through that, I've learned what I've needed to learn in order to see the necessity of something else. So it's all part of it. I never say this in terms of regrets. There's nothing of the sort. But it would be lovely if people didn't have to be pathologized, didn't have to have their path pathologized in this way. So it's interesting that I wrote that down a couple months ago, and now I'm really exploring the superhuman thing with what Ken Wilber wrote. So this inquiry into superhumanity isn't a personal thing. It's something that many people wonder about. It's something that we're moving towards if we're meditating, or we're moving towards if we're doing anything to attempt to improve ourselves. And I won't go into that right now. I have other things to talk about. I have so much that I've written down, and I do actually want to talk about some things I wrote today, and then maybe get to the superhuman stuff later, as well as some of the business things that I've thought of. Just having dialogue with myself, which is unfolding my own superhumanity. And today I tried to call home and the number didn't work. And so I texted and they said, oh, we had to change the number because they gave us the wrong area code and number when we moved. And it's actually the number I put on my medical ID bracelet because I thought that would be the best number to get a hold of everyone in the future if there was some kind of incident or challenge that was met by pathologization. And the number on my bracelet isn't even right. And I changed it in my medical ID on my iPhone. And today I was sort of tempted to just take the bracelet off because it says that phone number and it also says medication, 750 milligrams lithium, which is no longer true. And yeah, I just wanted to take it off. But then I didn't want to jinx it. I didn't want to feel more safe than I actually am because I'm still in the United States and I feel like I will just leave it on. It does say see medical ID, so it can at least refer to that. And at least if I'm wearing a phone number, I can say it's the wrong phone number. So it still invites a dialogue, but perhaps the wrong kind. And I will probably keep it on until I go home. And I will definitely take it off when I get home. So yes, just not wanting to jinx it. I told myself I would wear it the whole time. So I don't want to tell myself something else to my subconscious and get it confused. And it's sort of an epigesturetic way of telling myself that I do want to keep myself safe. I do want to live. Even if it has the wrong information, it's the right gesture. And the gesture is probably more powerful than the information itself. And a friend of mine sent me a YouTube video to watch the other day, and it was actually a lady, Anna Breitenbach, and she calls herself an animal communicator and an animal whisperer. And it was actually a video of her talking on behalf of the sharks because she was able to connect with shark consciousness and speak to them and sort of harvest that voice and give voice to it through the human voice so we can understand sharks better. And she also talked about how when we're in the water, if we're fearful, there's sort of these quantum holographs that are released, and other animals can pick up on that, such as sharks. If we're feeling competitive or afraid, the sharks can pick up on those quantum holographs. So I just thought it was interesting that she's using the same language that I've created for myself in some of the ways that I've been able to speak, perhaps for creatures or types of people beyond myself. And I feel like I'm able to communicate that. I don't necessarily feel like I'm necessarily communicating with them, but just really perceiving that type of consciousness, because we all share consciousness, and perhaps it is in the language of quantum holographs, sort of recognizing the patterns, and the interference patterns are all there, and we can sort of shine our laser light of perception on it to really see the images and interactions that arise and how that plays out, and speak to it. It seems actually like something that I'm able to do as well. Not necessarily that I'm an animal communicator per se, but I've said the same sort of thing of saying, giving voice to Gaia, Gaia-log, speaking as Gaia, speaking as nature, speaking as. We can speak as almost anything if we're able to really perceive and see and connect with that, because if we're not connecting with our ego structure that's self-centered and focused on me, then we can see a lot more and we can give voice to what we see, whether we're actually communicating directly with that consciousness or just really able to see and extrapolate holistic patterns and give voice to it. I'm not sure exactly, but I really was touched by her ability to just stand there confidently and say, hey, I speak with animals. I can communicate with them. I can understand them. I can ask them. And it's the same as being in dialogue or dialogue with everything and questioning something. And then when that question is posed to oneself, the brain works in sort of this quantum holographic domain to give an impression on the clear mind screen, to be able to give voice to that which one is inquiring into. So she is conscious and curious and concerned and inquiring into animals and their lives and their beings, and she's able to ask questions to them, whether it's a them or a they, particularly somewhere. It's not. It's all of consciousness, and by asking those particular questions, she's able to communicate with that. Call it shark consciousness. I feel like we can tap into communicating with almost any consciousness. But when we have the ego going in circles, we're not even really communicating with our own consciousness. We're just communicating as programs circulating upon themselves and creating some kind of momentum and circular structure that creates this illusion of a center. I remember in Physics 12 learning about centripetal acceleration and how something accelerates around a center. And anyways, if something's accelerating and going around in circles, it sort of creates a center that's not really there per se, but it's sort of implied in that it's moving in a circle. A circle has a center, but it doesn't mean there's an actual thing there. It's just maybe a point in space. But we feel that's where we're localized. But anyways, I also felt by listening to her that what she's really accomplished is something about really honing her sensitivities for a particular task, if you want to call it a task, or a particular connection. She might actually be able to connect with almost any consciousness, but she's directing her energy into having dialogue with animal species and picking up the subtle impression and giving voice to that in the human language so other people can understand. And I feel like we who go through map consciousness get in connection with this very subtle sensitivity. But we don't ever really get a chance to hone that and wonder about that and feel into where we want to direct that sensitivity and what we would like to give voice to. So maybe some people want to connect and be sensitive to a particular type of terrible experience that human beings go through and unfold and give voice to more of that. Or other people want to connect with dogs or connect with people or connect with certain even structural things in society. It's a sensitivity that is able to sense and perceive and put very subtle impressions into language. So the trouble is that when we go into map consciousness, we're feeling into all these different things, and it's hard to give voice to all these things. So we connect with this situation here and give voice to that, and this situation here and give voice to that. And it sounds like we've lost who we are because we're actually giving voice to the moment, and that can change. But as we hone it over time, we can actually start to select the moments we put in front of us. So I've talked before about we sort of give voice, or we are what we put in front of us on a continual basis. So if it's really random at first, because we're just sort of going through life when we first get connected with this kind of chaotically, it's like that on purpose, because that way we can actually discover that which we want to connect with, which maybe we had a sense of when we were children, and then we got moved away from that, and then when the ego breaks, we sort of are randomly bouncing around trying to figure it out again. So what I'm trying to say is, if she wouldn't have necessarily honed this sensitivity and honed this energy into something specific and have the confidence to give voice to that, she could have been pathologized too. I was watching her talking about the sharks say this and the sharks say that. A lot of doctors might actually think she's just a mental case. And obviously she's not. But how many people who doctors think are mental cases are obviously something a lot different than that, but they've just never been given the chance or the space or or the understanding or the love to be able to figure that out for themselves. They're just given the story of being mentally defective, when maybe we need to be somewhat mentally defective to be effective in all these other dimensions of humanity that we can connect with. Not just this mental construct that we live by. We're trying to get in touch with our whole being, all of our senses, every cell in our body. And when we're in touch with that, it creates different words coming out of our mouth. And it takes a while for us to actually learn what that's trying to communicate with us. And the other day, I wrote down something that felt really powerful about how, and I won't go into it fully, but really, when we first connect with this sensitivity, we can see so much more. We're sensitive to so much more. And not even see with our physical eyes, but see with all of our senses. And all of our senses are speaking to us at the same time. And we might go around saying to people, I feel so good, I feel so great, I'm so powerful, or, even like I feel like God, or basically we're saying we're feeling things we've never felt before. We're feeling power because there's power going to all these senses that pretty much have been turned off by the mental structure that we all have for all these years. And then we might talk about, or try to put into words things that we're seeing or things that we're sensing. So we might say something that seems really off to a person who's never connected with this. But to us, it's actually a perception that we're having. And it might seem out of context because we can get in touch with so much more context than the context that's created this society. So it seems off. But what I sensed was the underlying thing of it all is when we're saying things that don't make sense to other people, we're having a sense of something other people can't sense. So if we say something that doesn't make sense, it basically means I can sense something that you can't sense. Whatever it is that we say doesn't matter, but we're sensing something others can't sense. And when the other can't see it, and it's sort of like, what was that about? Then we get confirmation, oh, they can't see that. They don't see what I'm sensing, or they can't sense that. And then so we share more and more of these perceptions with people. And I'm not saying they have to be anything profound. We might just say, oh, that bird flying overhead means that it's going to rain tomorrow. And somebody might think, But we're just sensing something more. That's all it's saying. I'm sensing something more, and I'm trying to put it into words. And these might not be the right words, but I'm putting something more into words than just this structure that we always live and speak and talk and communicate by. And then the more people don't meet that, or unable to meet that, and sort of just see it as strange, that sense of, I'm seeing something more. I'm seeing something beyond the ego. I'm trying to put words into something that I've never sensed before because it's been blocked. The more that happens over time, like whether it's days or months or a year, who knows how long someone can go on like that, eventually, when a certain energy or momentum of that runs out, it actually gets turned into a projection. So if I'm actually sensing something for real and it's hitting my mind screen and I'm trying to give voice to it, and nobody can see what I'm saying, at some point it flips. And it goes from, I can see more, or I can see something, and I'm trying to say it, to, I'm seeing things. Because we go through life operating based on things and objects and separate objects. And in this map conscious state, we're giving voice to the whole, to the holistic perception. And people aren't used to people speaking based on holistic perceptions. They don't understand. So then eventually, when that sort of runs out, and a person isn't being met in that space, that person doesn't give up. That process sort of gives up. It's not a personal thing. It's that the ego person has actually dissolved that this begins to happen. But when that dissolvedness is not able to be met or something, eventually it actually gets turned into something. It gets turned into, I'm seeing things. So instead of someone walking saying, I can see that the birds flying together like this means they're communicating like that, or whatever it is, especially with so-called bipolar, we get in connection with a lot of words and perceptions, and we're just, to me, trying to make sense of this new language orientation. It's sort of a language orientation. We talk about gender orientations or sexual orientations. There's language orientations, the way we process language, whether it's subject, object, verb, or everything's a verb, or it's this whole and it's this quantum language. So we're trying to learn that. But when that learning sort of wears itself out, because if it didn't wear itself out, it would just keep going. It has to be somewhat in a dialogue, otherwise it just fizzles out. The energy of it fizzles out, because the energy is based on sharing perceptions together in dialogue and seeing together, not competing with each other's thoughts and opinions. But anyways, what I'm trying to say is when that energy seems to fizzle out, the process gets reversed to the ego, personal thing, and when it's back to the ego again, the ego is speaking as, I'm seeing something. And when it decides that I'm seeing something, which could actually be when the ego decides to make this about itself and the image-making structure that the ego is, and the ego is able to keep that structure limited within the head, but when it's actually holistic perceptions mixed in with the ego taking ownership of that, it will actually project something beyond the skull. And then when that happens, a person goes to someone and says, I'm seeing things. Or they might not directly say that, but over time it becomes obvious that they're seeing things that aren't there to the other. But the thing is that when the process began and it was magical and beautiful, and that person became sensitive because the ego structure was scrambled, they were also seeing things that aren't there. But they're there, they're everywhere for everyone to see, but it's pretty much the other can't see what the person who has become sensitive can see. And when it's met with disbelief by the other, and it's not even about believing it, but moving into a space of dialogue and seeing together. When it's not met with that dialogue and unconditional love, then this, I'm seeing something, or have new senses of something, or I'm feeling something more, and I'm trying to put it into words, and I don't know how. But when I say something, it's just an indication that I'm seeing something more beyond the ego. And then ego structures come in and sort of stamp that out over time. And then it gets flipped, and a person will then be saying, I'm seeing things that aren't there. So it could be, I'm seeing love is everywhere, or I'm feeling love is everywhere, to when that fizzles out, I'm seeing things that aren't there. So instead of, in the beginning of it, meeting with people who might be more in an egoic structure way of relating, meeting that in dialogue and wondering what that's all about, and creating this shared space of inquiring about what this means to see more beyond the ego, and seeing that when somebody's saying things that seem kind of out there, it's an indication they're seeing more, and wondering about that instead of being afraid of it. And then eventually, as the process moves along and gets transformed by the dominant paradigm and the dominant way of relating to that, subtly and in gestures, the person eventually gets flipped into, I'm seeing things that aren't there, and actually seeing things that aren't there, but it's projecting it from consciousness because the whole wasn't able to be communicated and shared to change the seeing of others ever so slightly. So that process seems pretty reasonable to me. And then, since one wasn't able to communicate initially, I'm feeling more, I'm seeing more, can you see it too? Like, let's talk about this or whatever. Eventually it gets changed into somebody's in a doctor's office saying, I'm seeing things. And then people listen because they're ready to just hand over a pill and treat them like mental patients for the rest of their life, when they were seeing more. They're seers, they're visionaries, there's something else going on. There's this visionary aspect that is bringing in some kind of new consciousness and new ways of perceiving. But these new ways of perceiving are medicalized eventually when one can't perceive. So when one can no longer give voice to these perceptions, it sort of fizzles out. And it's not something we can control. It's an energy that runs its course. And unfortunately, it runs many people into many courses of medications. And I can really see how it might not be necessary if there's dialogue about this. Not just, oh, we have the answer, you have a mental illness. And dialogue from the beginning, a new understanding from the beginning, not waiting till the energy fizzles out and then somebody's actually seeing projections from consciousness because one was not able to complete the voice reversal process of speaking as what one sees and perceives in the moment and sharing that with another. We're always speaking about our past and our story and all this thing. And we think if somebody's saying something other than that, then they're just strange. But I think it's strange to just talk about our stories and things. This video is getting a little long, and I'll perhaps go into that more later. And I wonder if I was able to unfold that reversal of seeing all this information and not being able to translate it into something shareable, and how eventually when it gets translated back into the ego projects images, and in order to share and be connected to people, one just says, basically, I'm having these symptoms. And it doesn't generally happen that way where somebody just goes to a doctor and says, I'm having these symptoms. It's usually people are sort of engaged in a dialogue about their symptoms, but not about their original perceptions, because it's left until the point where one is sort of moving back down from that level of perception back into this ego level of perception. And when one is integrating back into the ego again, the ego can actually project. It can project, I was seeing things, or I'm seeing things, because we were seeing things before, but they were difficult to put into words. But we weren't seeing things that weren't there. We're just able to give voice to things that are so subtle because we're very sensitive.